You ever sit in a room full of people who share your last name, who all say they love you and feel like a damn ghost? Not angry. Not even sad. Just not there. That was me last Saturday night, standing near the fireplace in my parents' perfectly staged living room, holding a half-empty glass of bourbon that had been refilled exactly 0 times, even though my little brother Cody's beer had been topped off 3 times already. Everyone was there. The house was packed. My mom, Donna, had gone all out, white lights wrapped around the banister, catering trays from that overpriced Italian place she only calls when she wants to impress, and enough red wine to flood the damn carpet if someone got too excited. I wasn't on the invite list originally. I knew that. My business partner Elise practically begged me not to go. But I did. Because there's a strange part of me that still wants to be seen. Even after all these years. Cody had just landed a job at Morgan & Finch, one of those glass tower, $300,000 base salary with bonuses kind of banks that people drop their morals and sell their souls for. He wasn't even 3 weeks in, and my mom was already acting like he cured cancer. And me? I was still between projects, as far as they knew. Hell, I could have walked in naked with the Nobel Prize duct taped to my chest, and they still would have asked if Cody was hungry. So we're all standing around, and Dad raises a glass. To Cody, he says, puffing his chest like a goddamn peacock. For getting into real finance, none of that crypto nonsense or online trading bullshit. That last bit? Yeah, that was for me. Direct hit. And the room laughs. Everyone laughs. Maya even claps, her manicured hand on Cody's shoulder, squeezing like she owns him. Which maybe she does. That's a whole different storm. Now, I've been quiet most of my life, but in that moment, I wanted to speak. I wanted to say something. Anything. Not about me being on the cover of Forbes 2 weeks ago. Not about how Elise and I had flipped a $200,000 stake in Covex Pharma into $15 million before most of the world even knew what that company did. No. I just wanted to be acknowledged. Not worshipped. Just seen. But instead, I swirled my drink, stared at the fireplace, and pretended I didn't hear my dad misquote Warren Buffett again. And then came the moment, the one that changed the tone of the room like a needle scratching across a record. Grandpa Hank stood up from the recliner in the corner, the one no one else ever dares to sit in. He's 87, slow to rise and slower to speak. Everyone quieted down the second he moved. The old man doesn't say much, but when he does, people listen. He pulled a beat-up iPhone from his breast pocket, one of those older models with a screen so cracked it looked like a spiderweb. And with all the effort in the world, he cleared his throat and held it up. "You seen this," he said, voice rough like gravel and smoke. The room paused, frozen in some bizarre cocktail of confusion and impatience. I didn't move. I knew what it was. I knew because I'd seen that same cracked phone light up with a Forbes headline the day it dropped, Jack Monroe, the quiet billionaire who outsmarted Wall Street. He tapped the screen with a crooked finger, the kind of tap that takes a few tries because arthritis doesn't give a damn about timing. Then he turned the screen to my dad. "Rick," he said, "you seen who your son really is?" There it was. My face, my name, the numbers, all of it, right there in digital black and white. My dad blinked like someone just slapped him with a wet rag. My mom went pale, the kind of pale that doesn't come from wine or nerves, but from something deeper, something close to shame. Cody laughed, nervous, sharp, too loud. "That's Photoshop or some viral thing, right?" he said, glancing around for backup. No one answered. Not even Maya. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. Grandpa Hank did all the talking I needed. He looked around the room like a judge in a courtroom, nodding slowly. Took me 3 minutes to Google him. Y'all ever think to ask? No one moved. No one breathed. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades, vindication. Not revenge. Not spite. Just pure, undiluted clarity. They'd chosen not to see me. For years. Decades. And now a cracked phone screen and a wrinkled old man force them to open their goddamn eyes. Still, I didn't smile. Not yet. Because even though the truth was out, even though every person in that room now knew exactly who the hell I was, the damage had already been done. Recognition doesn't erase years of silence. And no amount of "we're so proud of you" would glue back what they broke by ignoring me when it mattered most. So I raised my glass. Not in celebration. Not in sarcasm. Just a simple gesture, half toast, half farewell. Because when people finally see you after pretending you weren't there, you don't thank them. You leave. You walk out before they start rewriting history. I drained the last of my bourbon, set the glass on the mantel, and turned to Grandpa. He nodded once, firm, quiet approval. That was all I needed. As I reached for the doorknob, I heard my mom whisper behind me, "Jack, why didn't you tell us?" I didn't answer. Because some truths? They don't get served warm. They get served cold, clean, and just sharp enough to leave a mark. And I plan to leave more than one. I was 9 years old the first time I realized being right didn't mean a damn thing in my family, not when the wrong person said it with a charming smile and a perfect sideways grin. It was science fair season, 4th grade, and I had built a working solar oven out of cardboard, tinfoil, and one broken magnifying lens I'd found in Grandpa Hank's junk drawer. I baked a chocolate chip cookie in it. A real, edible cookie. It was slightly burnt. Yeah, but it was science. The judges gave me first place at school. My teacher wrote home about it. I got a certificate with gold foil on the edges. And what did my parents do? They took us to Dairy Queen, and the entire time they talked about how Cody had remembered to wear matching socks for once. He didn't even enter the fair. He just showed up. That was enough. From that moment forward, I knew the score, even if I didn't yet know the game. Cody, 2 years younger, blonder, louder, always a little bit off-center in a way people found adorable, had something I didn't. He fit the family mold. He was the kid that said, "I want to be an astronaut," and got applause. I said I wanted to be a physicist, and they asked me if I could pick something a little less lonely. They weren't mean about it. Not exactly. That's the thing, it was all so polite. So loving. So deeply rooted in this unspoken script where Cody was the main act, and I was the guy backstage fixing the lights. Even when I got straight A's year after year, it was treated like some weird fluke. Well, of course Jack's good at school. He doesn't really have any friends to distract him. When Cody scraped by with C's, it was he's just more social. People like him. That's going to take him far. By high school, I'd learned to stop expecting much. My wins were mine and mine alone. I stopped showing them my report cards. Stopped telling them when I got awards. When I got a near-perfect SAT score and a handwritten letter from MIT, I left the envelope unopened on my nightstand for a week. I eventually told Grandpa Hank. He nodded and said, "That's something. You gonna go?" I told him I wasn't sure yet. He just muttered, "Don't wait for anyone's damn blessing," and that was that. Cody, meanwhile, was busy becoming the walking embodiment of a college brochure. He played lacrosse badly, sang in choir loudly, wore ties to school for no reason. One time he made the local paper because he helped an old woman across the street and a neighbor took a photo. It made the front page. Mom framed it. Literally framed it. When I got accepted into Harvard, my dad said, "Well, that's great, but I thought you didn't like big cities." When Cody got into Penn State, they threw him a backyard barbecue. There were balloons. My aunt made a cake shaped like the Nittany Lion. I showed up late and left early. The worst part? I didn't even hate him for it. Cody didn't ask for the pedestal. He didn't demand the spotlight. He just lived there comfortably, as if he assumed it was always meant to shine on him. I can't even blame him for how things turned out, not really. He was loved loudly, so he learned to speak louder. I was loved quietly, if at all, so I learned to make my silence sharp. College changed everything for me. Harvard felt like a reset button, like I could finally build something that didn't need my parents' approval. But even then, I couldn't escape it. Every winter break, I'd come home to questions about Cody's dating life, Cody's grades, Cody's job prospects. I told them I was interning with a hedge fund my sophomore year. Mom nodded and asked if Cody could use me as a reference. And so I started pulling back. Not because I was angry, because I was exhausted. It's a strange thing to carry so much success inside you and feel like a damn fraud because no one in your life reflects it back. I started journaling, not because I was poetic, but because I needed a witness, even if it was just me. I wrote things like, "Today I made 30 grand before lunch, and I finally understand derivatives better than my professor," just so the words would exist somewhere outside of my own head. By the time Cody graduated and started talking about Wall Street like it was a promised land, I was already deep into angel investments and startups no one had heard of yet. Elise and I had met at a conference in San Francisco. She was brilliant, cynical, and unshakably calm in a crisis, basically everything I wasn't. We started small, real small, but we were good. And unlike my family, she saw me. But none of that mattered at Thanksgiving when Cody showed up in a suit and started talking about Goldman Sachs and building his brand. My dad turned to me and said, "See, Jack? Your brother's catching up. Catching up." Like I'd just been jogging in place waiting for him to arrive. It got to the point where the only real conversations I had were with Grandpa Hank. He didn't say much, but when he did, it stuck. One time he asked me if I was happy. I told him I didn't know. He said, "You'll know when you stop keeping score." I laughed, because I'd never stop keeping score. Not in that family. Not when every meal felt like a reminder that my scoreboard wasn't even plugged in. So yeah, when that toast happened and everyone clinked their glasses for Cody like he'd just invented banking, it wasn't new. It wasn't even surprising. It was just the latest chapter in a long-ass book I never asked to be written into. But the difference now? For once, I wasn't the only one holding the pen. Grandpa was writing too. And something told me he had a hell of a plot twist coming. I remember the first time I saw the Harvard Business School campus, all sharp corners and red brick, and confidence thicker than the Boston humidity in September, and I remember thinking, not for the first time, that I wasn't built for this kind of spotlight. Everyone walked like they had stock options in their steps, and every handshake felt like a silent resume exchange. I didn't hate it, not exactly, but I never felt like I belonged there. It was like being cast in a Broadway show where everyone already knew the choreography, and I was still figuring out how to tie my damn shoes. My first year, I kept my head down. I made it through the sleepless nights and the buzzword battles in group projects. I played the game. I smiled when someone said networking, like it was some sacred gospel and not just an excuse to drink overpriced cocktails with people who'd sell their own cousins for a corner office. I took notes, not just in class, but on the people, how they talked, how they moved, how they covered up their fear with jargon and expensive shoes. It wasn't until year 2 that I realized the truth. I wasn't going to survive in that world by fitting in. I was going to win by walking away. I left in the middle of a Tuesday lecture on risk modeling. The professor was diagramming the collapse of Lehman Brothers like it was a football game, and we were all supposed to admire the precision of the disaster. I packed my bag, walked out, and never came back. I didn't even tell my parents. What would be the point? They'd either scold me or ignore it entirely. Same result. Instead, I took a train to Denver with a duffel bag, 2 laptops, and a half-formed idea about flipping early-stage investments on undervalued biotech companies. I rented the garage apartment of a half-deaf jazz musician who only accepted cash and gave me one piece of advice: don't try to impress nobody. Most people ain't worth the price of your attention. The early days were brutal in that romantic, slow-burn kind of way you only appreciate once you've crawled out of them. I lived on ramen, instant coffee, and Wi-Fi from the diner down the block. I barely slept. I read every SEC filing I could find. I built spreadsheets until my eyes blurred. I made 100 bets and lost 90 of them, but the 10 I won? They were enough to keep going. And then I met Elise. We were both attending the scrappy local investor meetup that only about 20 people showed up to. She was wearing boots with cracked leather and a hoodie with a startup logo I'd never heard of. We got into an argument about clean energy valuation models that lasted 45 minutes, and by the end, we were grinning like idiots because no one else in the room had bothered to challenge either of us. She was quick, cynical, and carried herself like she'd already survived 3 lifetimes of bullshit. We got a beer after, then another. We started working together the next week. We pooled our resources, mine from a few lucky biotech flips, hers from a messy exit deal with a company she helped build and barely escaped. We didn't have investors, mentors, or safety nets. Just 2 underdogs with a grudge against the system and enough caffeine to power a small country. We worked 12-hour days in her kitchen, living off takeout and shared stubbornness. Every win felt stolen. Every loss felt personal. But we kept going. In 3 years, we turned 30,000 into 2 million. We moved out of our respective shoebox apartments and into a shared office space with windows and real desks. By year 5, we'd cracked 8 figures in holdings and had 6 startups under our belt, 3 already acquired, 2 hanging on, and 1 moonshot that could go nuclear if the FDA played nice. We never took outside funding. Never went public. We played in the shadows on purpose. The money was nice, sure, but it was the control that mattered. We answered to no one. Through all of this, I never told my family what I was really doing. They assumed I was still in tech, which to them meant I fixed printers and played video games all day. I didn't correct them. Why bother? They wouldn't understand the nuance. They wouldn't care about the years of study or the sleepless nights. They wouldn't ask about the calls at 2 in the morning or the hell of deciding whether to save a company or let it burn. To them, unless it came with a business card and a Fortune 500 logo, it wasn't real. The distance grew without me even noticing. I stopped calling for birthdays. I sent cards instead, nice ones, blank inside, no forced cheer. Christmas came and went. I sent gifts, all impersonal but expensive enough to prevent complaints. I visited once a year, if that. And every time, it was the same. Cody's stories filled the room, and mine stayed in my throat. I became the background noise, the son who never quite fit, but at least didn't cause trouble. The ghost son. And the strangest thing? I started to prefer it that way. There was freedom in invisibility. No expectations. No forced applause. Just the silence to build something that would outlive them all. Elise once asked me if it hurt, being invisible to the people who raised me. I told her no. That was a lie. It hurt like hell. But pain makes a damn good fuel if you know how to burn it slow. So when Forbes called us the most promising private investment team under 40, I didn't tell a soul in my family. Not one. When our portfolio crossed the 20 million mark, I celebrated with whiskey and Thai food alone in my apartment. And when Elise looked at me across the table and said, "Do you ever want them to know?" I answered honestly for once. Only if it costs them something. I didn't know then what that meant exactly. But now, looking back, standing in that living room with Cody's name bouncing off the walls and my own completely absent, I understand perfectly. It wasn't about revenge. It was about showing them what they missed while they were busy clapping for mediocrity. Not to punish them. Just to make sure the silence they gave me echoed back loud enough to rattle something. Maybe even break it. There's a particular kind of betrayal that doesn't come with screaming matches or slammed doors, the kind that unfolds so slowly and politely you almost don't notice it until the damage is already done, and when you finally do see it, you realize it had been unraveling right in front of you while everyone else kept smiling like nothing was wrong. That's what it was like with Maya. She didn't stab me in the back. She smiled at me while she twisted the knife, gently, like she thought if she moved slow enough I wouldn't feel it. I met Maya during undergrad, back when I still believed that love, like success, was something you earned through effort, attention, and good intentions. She was magnetic in a way I never was, soft-spoken but razor-sharp, the kind of girl who could make a room lean in just by raising an eyebrow. We met in an economics seminar where she challenged the professor's numbers and somehow made it charming instead of arrogant. I was hooked before the midterm. We dated for almost 3 years, and I honestly thought she was the one. The one person who saw me. The one person who didn't need me to be flashy or loud or in the spotlight. At least, that's what I told myself. In hindsight, what she loved wasn't the quiet, it was the potential. The idea of me. She came home with me for Thanksgiving one year. It was the first time I'd brought a girlfriend back, the first time I even wanted to, because I really believed my parents would see us, and maybe understand something about me they'd never bothered to figure out on their own. Instead, they greeted her like she was a new car Cody had just bought. My mom called her stunning no less than 5 times that night, and my dad pulled me aside to tell me, "Don't screw this up, Jack, she's way out of your league." At the time, I laughed. But deep down, something sour started to settle in. Cody was there, of course. Cody always made everything into a performance, and that dinner was no exception. He turned on the charm full blast, shoulder touches, jokes he barely understood, long-winded stories about his fantasy football league that Maya somehow found hilarious. I watched them from across the table, trying to ignore how easy it all looked, how naturally he slid into the space that should have been mine. I trusted her, though. I reminded myself of that 100 times that weekend. Then the texts started changing. A few weeks later, her messages were shorter, her calls less frequent. She said she was just stressed. Said she needed space. I gave it to her because I thought that's what love meant, letting someone breathe even if the air felt cold without them in it. 2 weeks of silence turned into a breakup over coffee in a crowded cafe. She looked sorry. She looked tired. She looked like someone who'd already left a long time ago. I didn't ask about Cody. I didn't want to know. I wanted to believe it had nothing to do with him. But the universe doesn't deal in kindness, and some truths have a way of finding you whether you're ready or not. The next time I saw Maya was 5 months later, at my parents' house, standing on the back porch during a 4th of July barbecue. Her hand was in Cody's. Her laugh was the same. But her eyes, they didn't meet mine once. No one said a word about it. My mom hugged her like she'd been family all along. My dad handed her a drink and called her our girl. And Cody? He didn't even flinch. He looked me in the eye, gave me that same half-grin he's had since we were kids, and asked if I wanted a burger like we were just 2 brothers enjoying the sun. That was the moment I knew. It had never been about Maya. It had always been about erasure. It wasn't that Cody wanted what I had, it was that he didn't think I deserved to have it in the first place. And maybe Maya felt the same. Maybe I was always the warm-up act in her story. Maybe I was just the stepping stone between what she thought she wanted and what everyone else told her she should want. After that, I stopped bringing anyone home. I stopped trying to explain myself. I stopped letting them close enough to take anything else from me. Elise once asked if I was still angry. I told her no. That wasn't true. I was angry. But not the kind of angry that explodes and shouts and breaks windows. I was the kind of angry that builds empires out of spite. The kind of angry that remembers everything and forgets nothing. The kind of angry that waits. Because here's the thing they never understood about me. I don't forget betrayal. I file it away. I turn it into fuel. I don't want apologies. I don't want tears. I want them to wake up one day, look around, and realize they burned the wrong bridge. That they backed the wrong horse. That the son they forgot was the man they should have feared. And Maya? She wasn't the heartbreak. She was the lesson. The warning label. The scar that made me smarter. I don't hate her. Not anymore. But I wouldn't pull her from the water if she were drowning, either. And that's not bitterness. That's clarity. When I see her now, standing beside Cody at family functions, dressed in success she didn't earn, wearing rings that shine but don't mean a damn thing, I don't feel pain. I feel nothing, and sometimes, nothing is the loudest answer you can give. The first time Grandpa Hank ever asked me a question about my work, I actually laughed, not because it was funny, but because I didn't expect it from him, not after all the years of silent nods and half-hearted grunts and those slow, unreadable looks he gave me across the dinner table while the rest of the family droned on about Cody's latest accomplishments like they were reading off a damn teleprompter. It happened one Sunday morning 2 years ago, when I dropped by his house just to check on the leaky pipe under his sink, and out of nowhere, he looked up from his worn-out recliner, newspaper in hand, and said, "Jack, what the hell is Kovacs and should I be buying it?" For a second, I thought he was joking, just tossing out some name he'd overheard on TV or misread in the business section. But then he held up a crumpled printout with a circle around a paragraph I'd written for an obscure industry blog about undervalued biopharmaceuticals. I hadn't shared that article with anyone. No family, no friends, not even Elise. So either he'd stumbled onto it by accident or he'd been watching me more closely than I'd realized. I sat down in the chair across from him and spent the next hour explaining the basics, how Kovacs was sitting on a potentially revolutionary arthritis treatment, how their stock had tanked after a bad earnings call despite promising trial results, how the market was underpricing the risk because analysts were too busy licking boots over at the bigger pharma firms to see what was right in front of them. He didn't say much during the explanation, just nodded slowly, tapping a pen against the side of a yellow legal pad like a judge listening to closing arguments. When I finished, he said, "I bought 200 shares this morning." I raised an eyebrow. "Before asking me?" He shrugged, that slow, quiet shrug that meant more than any speech. "Sometimes you just trust your gut," he said, "and mine said you know what the hell you're doing." That was the start of it, this strange, silent partnership we never really spoke about, not directly anyway. After that, he'd ask me a question now and then. Nothing too obvious. Just a name, a number, a short phrase he'd read and couldn't shake. I'd give him my thoughts, straight and simple, and he'd make his own calls. No pressure. No drama. Just old-school grit mixed with a newer kind of fire. I didn't realize he was keeping a list until a year later, when I found it by accident. I was looking for a wrench in his garage and came across a notebook wedged behind a box of war medals and oil cans. It was filled with company names, dates, prices, notes in his shaky handwriting, some of them circled, some crossed out, others underlined twice. And next to every name, one word, Jack. That hit me harder than anything else had in years. Not the money, not the investments, but the fact that he'd been paying attention. Quietly, deliberately. While everyone else was clapping for Cody just for showing up to work on time, Grandpa was watching me build something from nothing and keeping track like it actually meant something. That list, it wasn't just numbers on a page. It was proof. Proof that I hadn't been invisible to everyone. I never mentioned the notebook. He never brought it up either. We just kept doing our thing. When Kovacs tripled, he didn't brag. He just bought a better recliner. When a small AI startup I tipped him on got acquired and his brokerage account made more in a day than my dad earned in a year, he didn't rub it in. He just grinned and said, "Might be time to fix the back porch." What I didn't know was that he'd started talking to someone at Forbes. Elise had joked about it once, said maybe we needed a hype man if we ever wanted credit for the things we were doing in the shadows. I told her I didn't want the attention. And that was true, mostly. But Grandpa apparently had other plans. I found out later he'd reached out to an old friend from his Navy days who'd ended up as a mid-level editor, told him about his grandson, the ghost genius, and started sending over clippings, screenshots, damn near everything he could dig up on me. That man built a case file that would make a private investigator jealous, all while I thought he was just watching reruns of Gunsmoke and trying not to fall asleep before dinner. What gets me most is that he never asked for anything. Not a cut of the winnings, not even a thank you. He just wanted people to know. Not my parents. Not Cody. The world. He wanted someone to say, "This kid matters," because he knew the people who should have said it never would. I still remember the last line he wrote in that notebook. The only thing he wrote in big block letters, bold, and underlined 3 times. They won't clap for you, so clap for damn self. And maybe that's what this whole story is really about, not revenge, not even recognition, but the need to be seen by someone who doesn't need to be dazzled to believe you're worth a damn. The world's full of people who only see the surface, who only celebrate what's loud and shiny and easy to understand. But sometimes, it just takes one stubborn old man with a broken hip and a cracked phone to see what no one else will. The funny thing is, that list, his list, ended up being more accurate than most Wall Street analysts I've ever met. The man made more money following his grandson than most funds do following entire think tanks. And he never said, "I told you so." He just said, "Next time you see something hot, don't wait so long to call me." Now, when I look back at all of it, the missed dinners, the ignored awards, the empty chairs at my own celebrations, I realize something I didn't back then. It wasn't just that my parents never saw me. It's that they chose not to look. Grandpa Hank looked. And once he did, there was no unseeing it. That's what made the moment in that living room hit so damn hard, because when he pulled out that phone and showed them my face on the Forbes homepage, it wasn't just about success. It was a reckoning. One built, word by word, on a list nobody else even knew existed. There's something strange about success when it arrives not with fireworks and cheering crowds, but in the quiet moments between phone calls and emails, when your inbox starts filling with names you haven't seen since college. And everyone suddenly wants to grab coffee or pick your brain like they just remembered you exist, because some glossy publication finally told them it was okay to. The morning the Forbes article dropped, I was standing barefoot in my kitchen, staring at a cracked egg sizzling in a cast iron pan, when Elise burst in holding her phone like it was radioactive. She didn't knock, she never did, and she was already mid-sentence before the door even closed behind her. "You're on the damn list," she said, breathless, eyes wide, a mix of disbelief and vindication flashing across her face. Investor of the Year, Jack. Not regional. Not under 35. Not upcoming. The whole goddamn thing. I blinked. I stirred the eggs. I said nothing, because somewhere deep inside, I had already known it was coming. Not in an arrogant way. Not like I expected the world to kneel. But because I knew what we had built. I knew the numbers. I knew the wins. And I knew that staying in the shadows only lasts as long as you choose it to. Sooner or later, the light finds you, especially when your returns start embarrassing the hedge fund royalty and your predictions turn out to be more accurate than the Wall Street Journal's front page. The article wasn't even flashy. It was 3 columns, buried behind some story about a celebrity divorce and a tech CEO meltdown. But there it was, my name, my face, my portfolio performance laid out like gospel for the doubters. They called me the silent strategist, which Elise found hilarious and I found fitting. They wrote about how I avoided conferences, how I declined interviews, how my firm had no official name and no public-facing website, just a trail of smart bets and clean exits. They didn't mention my family. They didn't mention Harvard. They didn't mention Elise by name, at her request. But they got the numbers right. I had outperformed every major index by triple digits in 3 consecutive fiscal years. I had turned a modest fund into a juggernaut by betting on things no one else would touch: failed medtech startups, crumbling logistics firms, obscure AI companies run out of garages. While everyone else chased trends, I looked where no one wanted to look. And it worked. It kept working. So much so that now they couldn't ignore it. Elise poured us coffee, sat across from me, and said, "So, what now? You ready for the flood?" I didn't ask what she meant because I already knew. The phone calls, the emails, the invitations to speak at panels I had no interest in attending, the distant cousins who would suddenly remember my birthday, the ex-girlfriends who might reach out just to say hi. And then there was the real question buried underneath it all, the one I hadn't dared to ask out loud yet. Would they see it? My parents. My brother. Would they notice? Would it finally be enough for them to lift their eyes from Cody's LinkedIn profile and actually read something with my name on it? The answer, at least for the first few days, was no. Radio silence. No call from my mom. No awkwardly phrased text from my dad. Not even a sarcastic comment from Cody pretending not to care. It was as if nothing had happened. As if Forbes had written about a different Jack Monroe entirely. And in a way, they had. Because the man in that article, the disciplined, relentless investor who moved markets with whispers and spreadsheet tabs, that man wasn't the Jack they knew. That Jack had never come home for Thanksgiving. That Jack didn't fold his brother's college brochures or help clean the garage or ask permission to be seen. That Jack had outgrown the version of me they kept frozen in their minds, and they didn't have the tools to reconcile the two. So I did what I always did. I kept working. I replied to the emails that mattered. I ignored the ones that didn't. I declined every interview. I let the article breathe without trying to spin it. Elise took care of the logistics, fielded a few quiet inquiries from firms asking if we were looking for buyout opportunities, which we weren't. Not yet. We weren't finished. But the strange thing is, the article did more than open doors. It rattled windows I didn't even know were locked. Suddenly, old professors were emailing me congratulations. VCs who had once brushed us off were now offering lunch. A few local papers picked it up and wrote little blurbs. Nothing earth-shattering, but enough that the circles started widening. Enough that someone, eventually, would send it to my parents. I waited. And in that waiting, I realized I didn't actually care whether they called. Not in the way I used to. I wasn't craving their pride anymore. I didn't want an apology. I just wanted them to feel what I had felt for so long, left out, overlooked, not invited to the table. I wanted them to sit in a room filled with my name and wonder how they missed it. The call finally came 5 days later. My mom's number lit up my phone at 10:30 on a Thursday night. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail that started with, "Hi honey, I saw something online about you," and ended with a long pause before she hung up. I never listened to the whole thing. Because by then, it didn't matter. The world had already noticed. The markets had noticed. Forbes had noticed. And in the end, maybe that's all I really wanted, not revenge, not reconciliation, but proof that I could make enough noise in silence that even the people who never listened would have to hear it. The moment didn't explode. It landed slow and heavy, like a quiet storm rolling in from across a dry field, steady and unmistakable, impossible to ignore even if nobody had the guts to call it what it was. There was no warning, no build-up beyond the years of neglect that had stacked like firewood behind my ribs, waiting for one spark. That spark, as fate would have it, came in the form of an old cracked iPhone, the kind with a screen so splintered it looked like spider webs frozen in glass. Grandpa Hank held it like it weighed more than any bourbon bottle he'd ever lifted, and when he stood up from that recliner, his throne in the corner of the room, you could feel the air shift. The laughter died. The clinking glasses stopped. Even the music from the Bluetooth speaker cut out like it knew better. I had been sitting at the edge of the room, near the fireplace, nursing my second bourbon with the kind of patience that comes from knowing no one is going to offer you a third. Cody's celebration was still in full swing. People were patting him on the back like he'd just split the atom, even though all he'd done was land a job that 20,000 other Ivy League mouthpieces applied for. I wasn't bitter. Not anymore. I was just watching, detached, amused in that cold, quiet way that comes when you've stopped expecting anything from anyone and started enjoying the absurdity of it all. But Grandpa, he wasn't amused. Not by the noise, not by the speeches, not by the fact that I hadn't said a single word in over an hour. He was still the only one who ever looked at me with full awareness, like he wasn't seeing who I used to be or who I pretended to be, but something closer to the truth. So when he stood up and cleared his throat, every eye in the room turned to him, not out of respect, but because Hank Monroe didn't speak unless it was worth listening to. "You seen this," he said, voice gravel and smoke as he held up that busted screen for all to see. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just kept my glass near my lips, waiting. He tapped the phone, And with the kind of deliberate care only old men and bomb techs have, he turned the screen toward my father. Rick Monroe, my dad, the man who once told me that modesty is the mark of character right after praising Cody for showing off his college acceptance letter, looked down and squinted. Then he frowned. Then he leaned back, like the words on that screen had grown teeth and barked at him. My mother leaned over to peek, and I saw her hand twitch slightly, like she didn't quite know what to do with it. Cody, standing beside them with Maya on his arm, leaned in too. It was my face on that screen. A screenshot of the Forbes article. Big bold headline, "The Silent Strategist, Jack Monroe's Empire of Precision." My name, my portfolio, my achievements. All of it right there, lit up like a damn spotlight in a room that had gone dark for years whenever I walked into it. No one spoke at first. My dad blinked like a man seeing a ghost. My mom opened her mouth but made no sound. Cody let out a laugh, short, high, awkward. "Wait, this can't be real," he said, trying to pass it off as some glitch in the Matrix. "I mean, it's gotta be like a parody or something, right? I mean, Jack." I met his eyes. Said nothing, just watched. Grandpa turned to face the room, that iPhone still held high, defiant in its age and its clarity. "That's your son," he said to my parents, like they'd forgotten. "That's your damn son, and he's been out there doing real work while YLV been over here throwing parties for junior analysts." The room didn't know what to do with that. People shifted in their seats, suddenly interested in their drinks, their shoes, anything but the tension crawling through the walls like smoke. You could hear ice melt in a cup. You could hear Cody's ego deflate like a slow leak. And Maya, God bless her, couldn't even meet my eyes. My father finally found words. "Jack, why didn't you tell us?" And that was it. That was the moment. Not the Forbes article, not the sudden awkward silence, not even the wide-eyed stares from relatives who hadn't looked at me twice in 10 years. It was that one question, asked in that flat, confused tone, that made something in me snap, quietly, but completely. Because that question wasn't about curiosity. It was about control. It was the same as asking why I hadn't waited for their approval before becoming something they couldn't ignore. It was the sound of people realizing they missed the whole show while they were busy applauding a juggler in the parking lot. I stood slowly, smoothed the front of my shirt, and finished my bourbon in one long, silent pull. The kind of sip that closes a chapter. Then I set the glass down on the mantel and looked right at my father. Because I knew you wouldn't care until someone else told you to. And with that, I walked to the front door, brushing past a stunned Cody, past Maya's perfume and her tight-lipped embarrassment, past aunts and uncles and cousins who suddenly remembered my name. Grandpa didn't try to stop me. He just gave me one solid nod, no smile, no words, because he knew. He'd always known. Behind me, someone whispered my name. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to, because the silence that followed me out the door said more than applause ever could. Some silences stay with you long after the room has gone quiet, not because they're peaceful or comforting, but because they say the one thing nobody wants to admit, that there's nothing left to say that would actually matter. The silence that followed me out of my parents' house that night wasn't one of regret or sudden understanding. It was the raw, aching kind that makes people shift in their seats, that leaves them blinking too long, wondering if they missed something important or if the air just got heavier without warning. I didn't slam the door when I left, didn't make a scene, didn't look back, not because I wanted to be dramatic, but because I knew that any parting glance would only offer them the illusion that I might be waiting for some gesture of redemption. I wasn't. That door closed like the final page of a chapter that had taken too long to end. For a few days afterward, I did nothing but let the fallout drift into my inbox and voicemail like ash after a fire. My dad sent an email 2 days later, subject line "Talk soon," with a body so generic it might have been AI generated, full of phrases like "impressive work" and "you should have said something," and "we're proud, of course." As if pride after the fact is anything but a selfish attempt to reinsert yourself into someone else's victory. My mom called 3 times, all at odd hours, as if catching me off guard might make me more forgiving. I didn't answer. I didn't even listen to the voicemails. Elise read the transcripts aloud from her phone with the kind of detached sarcasm only someone who'd seen the whole thing unfold from day one could deliver. "You know," she said over coffee, "they're not sorry they ignored you. They're sorry they got caught doing it." That stuck with me. More than I wanted it to. Because that was the truth, plain and sharp. The guilt wasn't about me. It was about them. Their image. Their story. They had built their world on a version of me that didn't exist. A silent, forgettable brother who'd never step out of the shadows and make them look like fools. And now that I had, they didn't want reconciliation. They wanted a rewrite. Cody, to his rare credit, did reach out directly. He sent a text the night after Grandpa's phone had lit the fuse. It read, "I didn't know, man. Guess I never asked. You crushed it. Respect. No excuses. No fake humility." Just 10 words that almost sounded like something real. I didn't reply. I wasn't angry anymore, just done. You don't offer closure to people who only ever showed up to your story after the ending. And Maya? Silence. Total, absolute silence. I imagine that was the most honest thing she could have given me. Because anything else would have been a lie. Thanksgiving came fast, faster than it should have. I wasn't planning to go. Elise and I had already booked a weekend away in Montana, somewhere quiet and cold, where the snow smothers every sound and nobody asks what you do for a living. But then Grandpa Hank called. Not a text, not an email, a call. He doesn't call unless it's serious. He didn't tell me to come. He didn't guilt me. He just said, "I'd like to see you. The house might be loud. You don't have to stay long." So I went. I walked into the house an hour late, wearing a black sweater and the same coat I'd had since Denver, still no name brand labels, still no need to perform. The living room was full, but quieter than usual. Eyes tracked me, sure, but nobody rushed over. Nobody clapped. It was like they didn't know how to act now that they knew who I was. Cody sat on the couch, drink in hand, eyes duller than I remembered. Whether it was exhaustion or ego collapse, I couldn't tell. We nodded at each other. That was enough. Maya wasn't there. Grandpa was already in his chair, glass of scotch in hand, wearing the same navy sweater he'd worn at half a dozen other holidays like a piece of armor. He smiled when he saw me, a real one, not forced or proud or surprised. Just genuine. I sat next to him for a while, said nothing, drank slowly. Then I saw it. At the dining table, set with the usual spread of too many side dishes and not enough real conversation, there was one seat at the far end that no one touched. No plate. No glass. No silverware. Just a folded linen napkin placed neatly in the center of an empty setting. An empty chair. I knew it was mine. Everyone did. And not because they were saving a seat for me. This wasn't some grand gesture of welcome. It was a symbol. A reminder. That they had left it empty for years, in ways none of them had admitted, and now they didn't know how to fill it without pretending the past hadn't happened. They couldn't put my name on it now without admitting they'd erased it before. I didn't sit there. I didn't make a scene about it either. I ate standing up, talked to Grandpa, traded a few polite words with a cousin who'd always been more human than the rest, and then I left. Quietly. No speech. No confrontation. I didn't even take leftovers. As I reached the door, my mother called out my name, softer than I'd ever heard it, and when I turned, she looked at me like she finally understood something, but not enough to say it. Some people want forgiveness to come easy, like it's owed just because they finally realized they were wrong. But some debts don't get paid with words or turkey dinners. Some debts are settled with absence. That chair stayed empty long after I left. And something tells me it always will.